The conference room felt like a tomb. 20 faces stared at me across that mahogany table, and the only sound was my daughter-in-law's sharp intake of breath as I slid the folder across to my son. Inside were bank statements, property deeds, and a single photograph that would change everything. Marcus's hands trembled as he opened it, and I watched the color drain from his face when he saw what I'd discovered. 3 months of planning had led to this moment, but the story really began on a Tuesday morning in March, when I walked into their house and found my own belongings packed in boxes by the garage. Let me take you back to that morning in Chicago, before everything exploded. I'd just turned 62, and life should have been entering its golden phase. My late husband, Richard, had left me comfortable, not wealthy by any means, but secure. Our 3-bedroom brownstone in Lincoln Park had appreciated nicely over 30 years, and I'd built a modest consulting practice helping small businesses with their finances. I wasn't Fortune 500 material, but I knew numbers, and I knew people. What I didn't know was that my own son had been keeping secrets that would make a corporate auditor weep. Richard and I had built our life together brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice. We'd bought the brownstone in 1993 when the neighborhood was still rough around the edges, when gunshots occasionally punctuated summer nights and we triple-locked our doors. Back then, young professionals avoided Lincoln Park. We paid $240,000, which felt like a fortune on Richard's engineer salary and my bookkeeping work. I remember the first night we spent there, sleeping on a mattress on the floor because we couldn't afford furniture yet, listening to the pipes knock and the floorboards settle, convinced we'd made a terrible mistake. But we'd had a vision. Richard would draw plans on napkins over dinner, showing me how we'd renovate room by room, how this neighborhood was on the cusp of transformation. He was right, of course. He usually was about these things. We spent weekends at Home Depot, learned to retile bathrooms from YouTube videos before YouTube was even a thing, attending community workshops at the local hardware store. I learned to strip wallpaper while 7 months pregnant with Marcus, my belly brushing against walls that smelled of old glue and decades of other people's lives. Those were hard years, beautiful years. The kind that bond you together or tear you apart, and we were lucky enough to be in the first category. Richard would come home from work, his dress shirt swapped for paint-stained overalls, and we'd work until midnight, fueled by cheap pizza and cheaper beer, while baby Marcus slept in his portable crib, lulled by the sound of our sanders and hammers. Our neighbors thought we were crazy. The Hendersons next door took bets on how long we'd last before selling at a loss and retreating to the suburbs like sensible people. We lasted 30 years. Richard didn't, though. Pancreatic cancer took him in 2019, fast and merciless, 6 weeks from diagnosis to funeral. I held his hand in that hospice room while he made me promise to keep the brownstone, to never sell our life's work for anything less than what it was worth. "That house is your security, Helen," he whispered, his voice already fading. "Promise me you won't let anyone convince you otherwise. It's not just wood and brick. It's our sweat and dreams. It's yours." I promised, and I meant it, back then. That Tuesday started ordinary enough. I drove over to Marcus and Jennifer's place in Evanston with a casserole and some hand-me-down clothes for my grandchildren. We'd always had this arrangement, you see. I'd help with the kids, bring over meals, and in return, I got to be grandma. I got to matter. Their Victorian needed work they couldn't afford on Marcus's teacher salary, so I'd been quietly helping with repairs. Just last month, I'd paid for the new furnace. $12,000 I didn't blink at because family takes care of family. The drive from Lincoln Park to Evanston takes about 40 minutes on a good day, longer when traffic on Lakeshore Drive backs up like blood in a clogged artery. I'd made this drive twice a week for 3 years, sometimes more when Jennifer called with an emergency. The casserole in the passenger seat was my mother's recipe, chicken and wild rice, the kind of comfort food that had sustained 3 generations of our family. The smell filled my car, and I'd cracked the window to let in the March air, still cold, but carrying that promise of spring, that Chicago phenomenon where winter finally admits defeat. I remember everything about that drive with crystalline clarity now. The way the sun hit Lake Michigan, turning it into hammered silver. The jogger in neon yellow, who nearly ran into traffic at the Fullerton intersection. The Bob Dylan song on the radio, something about the times changing. Ironic in retrospect. I was humming along, actually happy, anticipating Emma's shriek of joy when I pulled into the driveway, the way Jackson would wrap his sticky hands around my neck and demand I read his favorite book about the train that could. I'd stopped at Mariano's on the way, picking up those expensive organic fruit pouches that Jennifer insisted the children needed, $45 for a box of what was essentially applesauce in fancy packaging. But I'd bought them without complaint because that's what grandmothers do. We pay the grandmother tax, that unspoken levy on our wallets and hearts, because the alternative is unbearable. I used my key to let myself in, calling out hello to the empty hallway. That's when I saw them. 4 cardboard boxes stacked neatly by the garage door, each one labeled in Jennifer's precise handwriting. Helen's things. My heart started doing this weird flutter, like a bird trapped in a cage. I walked closer, my shoes echoing on their hardwood floors, the floors I'd helped refinish 2 summers ago. Inside the boxes were my photo albums that I'd stored in their attic, my mother's china that I'd let them borrow, even the Afghan I'd been crocheting during my visits, left half-finished like it didn't matter. The photo albums hit me hardest. 3 leather-bound volumes documenting Marcus's childhood, from his first breath in Northwestern Memorial to his college graduation at Illinois State. I'd stored them here after Richard died. Couldn't bear to look at them in the empty brownstone, all those pictures of our little family of 3, now reduced to 1. Jennifer had offered to keep them safe, had even suggested we go through them together someday, make a digital archive for the children. They should know their heritage, Helen, she'd said, squeezing my hand with what I'd interpreted as genuine warmth. We're family now. Your memories are our memories. But here they were, packed away like unwanted donations to Goodwill. I opened the top album with trembling fingers. Marcus at 6, missing his 2 front teeth, holding up a trophy from his first spelling bee. Richard's arm around him, pride radiating from his smile. I was there too, in the background, always in the background of these photos. The one behind the camera, the one preserving memories for everyone else. My throat closed up, and I had to grip the banister to steady myself. The china was my mother's, brought over from Poland in 1952 when she was just 17. One of the few possessions she'd managed to keep through immigration and poverty, and the grinding adjustment to American life. Delicate plates with hand-painted blue flowers, each one a small miracle that had survived decades of use and 2 transatlantic journeys. I'd given them to Jennifer for their wedding, a passing of generational treasure, the kind of gift that says, "You're family now, you're trusted with our history." Each plate was wrapped in newspaper now, Jennifer's methodical hand evident in the precise folding. I unwrapped one and saw she'd used the Chicago Tribune classified section. Jobs listings and apartment rentals, as if my mother's plates were just objects to protect, not heirlooms with stories etched into every chip and crack. There was a small fracture along the rim of one plate, and I remembered exactly when it happened. Marcus was 9, helping me dry dishes after Thanksgiving dinner, and he'd fumbled it. He'd cried more than I did, terrified I'd be angry, but I'd hugged him and said plates can break, people matter more. Richard had glued it back together, and the hairline crack became part of its story, evidence that this china was used and loved, not just displayed. "Oh, Helen, you're early." Jennifer appeared at the top of the stairs, her smile tight and professional, the way you'd greet a door-to-door salesperson. She descended in that calculated way of hers, every step measured, her designer athleisure somehow making me feel shabby in my comfortable cardigan. "I was going to call you about this." She was wearing Lululemon, the full matching set that costs more than my monthly grocery budget. Her hair pulled into a perfect high ponytail, her skin glowing with what I later learned was a $150 facial serum. At 32, Jennifer was everything I wasn't at 62, toned, polished, Instagram ready. She ran a lifestyle blog called Curated Living with 40,000 followers who obsessed over her home organization tips and aesthetic meal planning. Our family disaster was probably fodder for some future post about maintaining boundaries with difficult in-laws. About packing up my belongings like I'm being evicted. The words came out sharper than I intended, but my hands were shaking. Don't be dramatic. We're just reorganizing. The attic needs to be cleared out for Marcus's home office. You understand? She touched my arm, that patronizing little pat that had become her signature move. You have so much room at your place. It makes more sense. Her perfume hit me then, something expensive and floral that probably had French words in its name. It mixed with the smell of my casserole, still warm in the car, and I felt vaguely nauseous. The house was immaculate, as always, every surface gleaming, every throw pillow perfectly arranged, the kind of cleanliness that felt hostile to actual living. I thought about my brownstone with its comfortable mess. Books stacked on tables, Emma's crayon drawings still magneted to my refrigerator. The kind of home that welcomed chaos, because chaos meant life was happening. Where are the children? I asked, looking around the empty rooms. Usually by now, Emma would have heard my voice and come running, her small body launching at me with the kind of abandon only 7-year-olds possess. Jackson would toddle behind, calling "Gamma, Gamma," unable to pronounce the R yet. And I'd scoop them both up and breathe in their shampoo smell and feel necessary. "Playdate," Jennifer said crisply. "They're very social children, Helen. We're fostering independence and peer relationships. The child psychologist we've been seeing recommended more structured socialization outside the family unit." Child psychologist. They were 5 and 7. Is something wrong? Why do they need a psychologist? "Oh, Helen." That laugh, tinkling and condescending. "All the best parents are using developmental specialists now. It's not about something being wrong. It's about optimizing their potential. You wouldn't understand. It's generational. Parenting has evolved since your day. Since my day, as if my son, the kind, empathetic teacher who spent his own money on supplies for underprivileged students, was raised by wolves instead of with love and attention and sacrifice." I swallowed the retort, swallowed it like I'd been swallowing everything else, letting it sink into my stomach where it could join all the other unspoken truths rotting inside me. Here's what you need to understand about gaslighting. It doesn't happen all at once. It's not a single lie or manipulation. It's 1,000 small adjustments to reality until you're standing in someone else's house, looking at your packed belongings. And somehow you're the one apologizing. And I did apologize. I actually said sorry for not calling first, for assuming I was still welcome to use my key. The words came out automatic, programmed by 3 years of training. "I'm sorry, Jennifer. I should have texted first. I just thought, with the casserole and the clothes for the kids, I'd drop them off and maybe stay for lunch. But I can see you're busy. I'll just get these boxes loaded and—" "That's so understanding of you." She was already guiding me toward the door, her hand on the small of my back, gentle but insistent. The way you'd guide someone who's overstayed their welcome at a party.
"You know, Helen, I've been meaning to talk to you about boundaries. Marcus and I have been doing a lot of personal growth work lately. Have you heard of attachment theory? We're learning that sometimes the healthiest thing for adult children is to establish independence from parental figures who might be, not intentionally of course, but perhaps a bit too involved. I was being lectured on attachment theory in my own son's hallway while my belongings sat packed at my feet. The absurdity should have been funny, but I couldn't find the humor. I just nodded, that automatic nod of agreement, the same nod that had gotten me through every uncomfortable interaction with Jennifer. Every slight disguised as concern, every insult wrapped in psychological jargon. I know you're probably screaming at your screen right now, telling me to grab those boxes and walk out with my dignity intact. But love isn't blind. Love is paralyzed. Love is watching your only child choose someone else's version of reality and convincing yourself that if you just try harder, give more, sacrifice better, everything will go back to normal. But normal had been dead for 3 years, and I'd been performing CPR on its corpse, refusing to acknowledge that what I was trying to revive had already been buried. I just hadn't been invited to the funeral. Marcus came home an hour later, and I was still there, sitting at their kitchen table while Jennifer made tea neither of us wanted. He kissed her first. That should have told me everything, but I was still in denial. "Mom! Hey, didn't know you were coming by." He looked tired. That was my first coherent thought. My son, my baby, looked exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with his teaching job or parenting two young children. There were shadows under his eyes, new lines around his mouth, and when he loosened his tie, his movements carried the weariness of someone much older than 35. He'd lost weight too, his dress shirt hanging looser than it should on his frame, and I wondered when I'd last seen him eat a full meal without Jennifer monitoring every bite and commenting on nutritional content. "Your mother was just picking up her things," Jennifer said smoothly, her hand possessively on his shoulder. "I told her we'd deliver them this weekend, but you know Helen, always so independent." The way she said my name, like it was a condition rather than an identity. Marcus didn't meet my eyes. My son, who used to tell me everything, who called me when his goldfish died in 3rd grade and sobbed like the world was ending, couldn't look at his own mother. I watched something happen in that moment. Something I'd witnessed before, but never let myself acknowledge. Jennifer's fingers tightened on his shoulder, not quite digging in, but close, and Marcus's whole posture shifted. He straightened, his expression smoothing into something neutral and diplomatic, like a soldier snapping to attention. Whatever he might have wanted to say died behind his teeth, replaced by whatever script Jennifer had prepared for him. "About that, Mom." He sat down across from me, and Jennifer remained standing, a silent sentinel. "Jen and I have been talking, and we think it might be better if we establish some boundaries. Healthier, you know, for everyone." Boundaries. That word has been weaponized by amateur psychologists and manipulators everywhere. Real boundaries are necessary and good. But what Marcus described wasn't boundaries. It was exile. No more dropping by unannounced. No more keeping a key. Weekly visits would be scheduled in advance. Jennifer would send calendar invites, to see my own grandchildren. He kept talking, but I was watching Jennifer instead. The small smile playing at the corner of her mouth, the satisfied gleam in her eyes as she watched me crumble. She was enjoying this. This wasn't about healthy boundaries or family dynamics or any of the therapy speak she kept deploying like weapons. This was about power, about establishing dominance, about erasing me from my own son's life and making sure I knew it was happening. "Marcus," I said quietly, interrupting his rehearsed speech about mutual respect and individual space. "Do you remember when you were 8 and you broke your arm falling off your bike?" He blinked, confused by the non sequitur. Yeah, of course." "You were trying to impress Danny Martinez, showing off by riding with no hands. You crashed into a parked car and your radius fractured in 2 places." I kept my voice steady, even though my heart was hammering. "Your father was at a conference in Denver. I was the one who heard you screaming, who scooped you up and drove you to the emergency room while you threw up from the pain all over my new car seats. I held your good hand while they set the bone, and you squeezed so hard you left bruises. You made me promise not to tell Dad about the showing off part, and I never did. We told him it was just an accident." Jennifer's smile had faded. Marcus was staring at the table, a muscle working in his jaw. "Do you remember what you said to me that night after we got home with your cast? You climbed into my bed because your arm hurt too much to sleep, and you told me I was your favorite person in the whole world. You said that when you grew up, you'd take care of me the way I took care of you. You said you'd never let anything bad happen to me because I was your mom, and that meant forever." "Mom, I was 8. His voice cracked. "I know," I said softly. "Children make promises they don't understand. I'm not holding you to something you said 27 years ago. But I need you to look at me, Marcus. Really look at me. And tell me yourself, in your own words, not anyone else's script, that this is what you want. That you want your mother out of your life. That calendar invites to see your children feel right to you. For a moment, just a moment, I saw my son in his eyes. Real recognition, real conflict, maybe even real regret. But Jennifer moved, just a small shift, and the moment shattered. "It's what we need, Mom," he said, and the emphasis on "we" told me everything. "I'm sorry if that hurts your feelings, but I have to prioritize my wife and children. That's how marriage works." "I see," I said, and I did see. I saw Jennifer's satisfied smile. I saw my son's guilt. I saw 32 years of motherhood being reorganized into a scheduled appointment. And the kids? Emma and Jackson? The kids are fine, Helen. Jennifer again, speaking for my son like he'd lost his voice. They're just so busy with activities now. Swimming, violin, Mandarin classes. We've enrolled them in this wonderful cognitive development program. Very intensive. It doesn't leave much free time. Mandarin classes. Emma was 7. Jackson was 5. But I bit my tongue because that's what I'd been trained to do over these last 3 years since Jennifer entered our lives. Bite your tongue. Smile. Don't make waves. Be grateful for whatever scraps of family you're allowed. "May I at least say goodbye to them?" I asked, hating how small my voice sounded. I brought them some things. Clothes that Emma needs, and that book Jackson wanted about dinosaurs. Jennifer's expression flickered with something that might have been annoyance or might have been triumph. "They won't be home until late, but I'll make sure they get the items. You can see them at our scheduled visit next week. I'll send you a calendar invite for Sunday, 2 to 4 p.m. Does that work for your schedule?" 2 hours on a Sunday afternoon, scheduled and controlled. This was my new reality. I looked at Marcus, really looked at him, trying to memorize his face in case even this crumb was eventually taken away. He still wouldn't meet my eyes. I loaded those boxes into my Subaru, and Marcus helped, which somehow made it worse. We worked in silence, and when the last box was secured, he hugged me, quick and tight, like ripping off a bandage. "It's for the best, Mom. You'll see. This will make things less complicated." Less complicated for whom? I wanted to ask. But I drove home to Lincoln Park, unloaded those boxes into my empty house, and cried for the first time since Richard's funeral. The kind of crying that comes from somewhere deep and primitive, where grief and rage get tangled up together. I cried until my ribs hurt, until the neighbor's dog started barking in sympathy, until the light changed from afternoon gold to evening gray. The brownstone felt different when I finally stopped crying, emptier somehow, even though nothing physical had changed. I walked through the rooms Richard and I had built together, touching the chair rail we'd installed one sweaty July, the built-in bookshelf he'd designed for my birthday, the kitchen backsplash we'd argued over for 3 weeks before agreeing on a compromise neither of us loved but both could live with. Every surface held memory, and now those memories felt accusatory. What had it all been for? If our son could so easily dismiss the life we'd built, the values we'd tried to instill? I made myself eat something, couldn't tell you what, just went through the motions of feeding a body that felt disconnected from my consciousness. The casserole was still in my car, forgotten and cooling, a perfect metaphor for the day. I'd have to throw it out, probably. Chicken and wild rice didn't reheat well after sitting for hours. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed listening to the sounds of the city, sirens and late-night traffic and somebody's party 3 blocks over, and I kept replaying every interaction from the past 3 years. The first time Jennifer corrected how I held baby Jackson. The Christmas she convinced Marcus to spend with her family in Connecticut. The birthday party where she seated me at the children's table. The 1,000 tiny cuts that I'd explained away as accidents. The Christmas one should have been my wake-up call. We'd always spent Christmas at my house, always, since Marcus was born. It was tradition, sacred, and inviolable. The brownstone decorated with Richard's mother's ornaments, the tree always placed in the same corner of the living room. Christmas morning pancakes with blueberries shaped into smiley faces. A tradition I'd started when Marcus was 3. When Emma was born, I'd assumed this tradition would continue, expanding to include another generation. But that first Christmas after Jennifer joined the family, she'd announced in October that they'd be spending the holiday with her parents in Greenwich. "It's only fair, Helen," she'd said, her voice reasonable and measured. "They haven't had a Christmas with Marcus yet. You've had 30-some years. Surely you can share." Share. As if my son was a toy to be divided equally. As if 33 years of tradition could be erased to appease parents who'd barely acknowledged Marcus's existence until they had a grandchild to show off to their country club friends. But I'd agreed, because Jennifer made me feel selfish for wanting to maintain our tradition. I'd spent that Christmas alone, the brownstone decorated for no one, eating Chinese takeout and pretending I didn't care. They'd gone to Connecticut the next year too, and the year after that. At some point, sharing had become permanent reallocation, and I hadn't fought back because fighting would make me the difficult mother-in-law, the stereotype Jennifer was so carefully constructing for anyone who might listen. And then I remembered something. A conversation with my neighbor Margaret, who'd watched me loading those boxes. She'd been through something similar with her daughter and son-in-law. "Helen," she'd said, gripping my arm with her weathered hand, "that's not love. That's abuse dressed up in politeness. Wake up before they've taken everything." At the time, I'd dismissed it. Margaret was dramatic, always reading malicious intent into innocent actions. But lying there at 2 a.m, staring at the ceiling cracks that looked like rivers on a map, her words echoed differently. Studies show that 6% of the population has narcissistic personality disorder, 1 in 16 people. What were the odds that my son had married one of them? I got up and made coffee, even though dawn was still hours away. Sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and started doing what I do best: research, numbers, facts. I pulled up my bank statements going back 3 years, every transaction highlighted and categorized. The pattern emerged like a photograph developing in chemicals, and I felt sick. $12,000 for their furnace, $8,000 for Marcus's car repair, $2,500 for Emma's medical bills when their insurance lapsed, $6,000 for various home repairs, $4,000 for that vacation they took to Florida, which Jennifer posted all over social media while I babysat their dog. The list went on. $63,000 over 3 years, not loans, gifts, given freely because that's what mothers do. But as I looked closer, details jumped out that I'd ignored in real time. The furnace, for instance. Jennifer had called me in a panic, claiming theirs had died and they had no heat in January. The children were freezing. Could I possibly help? I'd written the check immediately, grateful to be needed, to be able to solve a crisis. But now I pulled up Marcus's Facebook from that month and saw photos he'd posted. The family at the Lincoln Park Zoo, Emma and Jackson in light jackets, certainly not the winter parkas required in a freezing house. Jennifer in the background of one photo, laughing, no visible distress about hypothermic children. Had the furnace really been broken? Or had that been the first test, to see how much money they could extract with the right story? I felt paranoid even thinking it. But I kept digging. The car repair. Marcus had called me about that one, sounding stressed. "Mom, the transmission's going. The mechanic says $8,000 to fix it, and we just don't have it right now. Jennifer's mad at me for not maintaining it better." I'd heard Jennifer's voice in the background, sharp and accusatory, and my protective instincts had kicked in. I'd paid for the repair to stop Marcus from being berated. But now I wondered, had Jennifer engineered that call? Had she been scripting his stress? Emma's medical bills. That one I was certain about because I'd gone with them to the emergency room. Emma had fallen off the monkey bars and needed stitches. Scary, but not serious. At the hospital, Jennifer had made a show of her insurance card not working, the receptionist getting increasingly frustrated, other families in the waiting room watching our drama. "I don't understand," Jennifer had said, tears in her voice. "We paid the premium. This is outrageous." She'd turned to me, eyes desperate. "Helen, could you possibly cover this?" "We'll pay you back as soon as we sort out the insurance mess." I'd paid. $2,500 for an emergency room visit and 5 stitches. They never paid me back. And now I wondered, had the insurance really lapsed? Or had Jennifer simply not presented it, knowing I was there as a safety net, knowing I'd never let my granddaughter go without care? But here's what made my blood run cold. 2 months ago, Marcus had asked me about my estate planning. Casual conversation over dinner, or so I'd thought. Who was my beneficiary? Did I have a will? What were my assets worth? I'd answered honestly, because he was my son, my only child, my everything. The brownstone alone was worth over $1 million now, Lincoln Park property being what it was. My investment accounts, Richard's life insurance payout that I'd been careful with, my small business, total net worth, approximately $2.3 million. That dinner had been Jennifer's idea, a reconciliation of sorts after a particularly tense Thanksgiving. "Let's just have a nice family meal, Helen," she'd suggested. "No tension, just quality time. I'll make your favorite pot roast." She'd made pot roast, tender and perfect, served with expensive wine and warm bread. The children had been sent to a friend's house, giving us adult time. It should have been lovely. Instead, it had been an interrogation disguised as concern. Jennifer had led the conversation with practiced ease, steering it from Marcus's work stress to financial planning to retirement security to estate planning. "It's just that we worry about you, Helen," Jennifer had said, reaching across the table to touch my hand. "Living alone in that big house, at your age. What if something happened? Do you have your affairs in order? Marcus would be devastated if there were complications when, God forbid, something happens to you." I'd told Jennifer this too, because she'd been so interested, so caring about my future planning. "Helen, you've worked so hard," she'd cooed. "You deserve to know your legacy is secure. Have you thought about setting up a trust? I have a lawyer friend who specializes in estate planning for seniors. Very affordable." Her lawyer friend. I pulled up my email and found his contact information, sent at midnight with Jennifer's enthusiastic recommendation. Gregory Chambers, estate planning attorney. I Googled him at 3 a.m. and found something interesting. His firm specialized in elder law, yes, but also in a particular kind of estate planning. The kind that involved transferring assets to family members before death to avoid taxes. The kind that left seniors with nothing while their children gained everything. I clicked through to his website, professional and sleek, featuring smiling elderly clients and their grateful families. Testimonials praised how smoothly the asset transfers had gone, how the firm had helped them protect their legacy while ensuring their children's financial security. Translation: "We help your kids take your money before you're dead." There were case studies, anonymized but detailed. A widow in Naperville who transferred her home to her daughter, then paid rent to live in her own house. An elderly man in Oak Park who'd signed over his investments, only to find himself cut off when he disagreed with his son's financial decisions. Story after story of seniors who trusted their children and ended up dependent, powerless, erased. I felt bile rise in my throat. Had Jennifer been planning this all along? Had every kind gesture, every family dinner, every grandchild visitation been strategic manipulation leading to this moment? Was I the widow in Naperville, too trusting, about to sign away everything Richard and I had built? I thought back to other conversations, other moments that had seemed innocuous at the time. Jennifer casually mentioning how much easier my life would be in a condo, somewhere with no maintenance, no stairs for my aging knees. Marcus worrying about property taxes, suggesting I might be house poor, struggling to maintain something too big for my needs. Jennifer sending me articles about senior living communities, beautiful places with amenities and social activities, so much better than rattling around alone in that old brownstone. They'd been softening me up, preparing me to see my home as a burden rather than a blessing, priming me to think that giving it up would be liberation rather than loss. And I'd almost fallen for it. At 4 a.m, I did something I'd been avoiding since Richard died. I called his best friend, Thomas Chen, who'd been the lawyer for our business dealings, who'd helped us with our wills and estate planning decades ago. Thomas had semi-retired to Arizona, but he'd told me at Richard's funeral to call any time, day or night, if I ever needed anything. He answered on the 3rd ring, his voice alert despite the hour. "Helen, what's wrong?" I told him everything. The boxes, the boundaries, the money, the estate planning conversation, Jennifer's lawyer. I heard him sigh deeply on the other end, a sound of recognition and regret. "Helen, I'm going to tell you something, and you're not going to want to hear it. I saw warning signs at Marcus's wedding. The way Jennifer controlled every aspect, the way she positioned herself between Marcus and everyone else, including you. Richard saw it too. We talked about it, wondered if we should say something, but ultimately decided it wasn't our place. We were wrong. We should have warned you." My hands tightened on the phone. "You and Richard discussed this?" He was worried. Not that Marcus was making a mistake, exactly. Your son loved her, loves her. But Richard recognized certain patterns. He grew up with a narcissistic mother, Helen. You knew that. He spent years in therapy understanding those dynamics. He saw some of those same traits in Jennifer, but softer, better disguised. He hoped he was wrong. He hoped love would be enough. I'd known about Richard's mother, of course. She'd died before Marcus was born, and Richard rarely spoke of his childhood except to say it had been difficult. But now pieces clicked together. The way Richard had always been so careful about my autonomy, never making decisions for me, always asking my opinion even on small things. His insistence that we maintain separate bank accounts even though we shared everything. His fierce protectiveness of Marcus's independence, teaching our son to think for himself, to question authority, to recognize manipulation. Richard had been trying to inoculate Marcus against exactly this situation, and it hadn't been enough. "Thomas, what do I do?" "First, you don't sign anything that lawyer sends you. Second, you document everything. Every financial transaction, every interaction, every promise made and broken. Third, you call me tomorrow during business hours, and we're going to make sure your estate planning is airtight. No one takes anything from you without your explicit, documented consent. And Helen, you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that this gets worse before it gets better. If Jennifer is what we think she is, she won't respond well to being blocked from her objective." I spent the rest of that night documenting everything I could remember from the past 3 years. Every check I'd written, every favor asked, every subtle manipulation and reframed reality. By the time the sun rose over Lake Michigan, painting my kitchen in shades of gold and amber, I had a 17-page document detailing a pattern of financial exploitation and emotional abuse. A betrayal this deep doesn't heal. It scars over. But I wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. If Jennifer wanted to play games with estate planning and family dynamics, she'd picked the wrong woman. I'd spent 40 years in the business world, managing numbers and navigating personalities. I knew how to research, how to build a case, how to plan a strategy. I started with social media. Jennifer's blog and Instagram were public, a carefully curated window into her perfect life. I scrolled back through 3 years of posts, screenshots, and saved everything. There, in her own words and images, was evidence of every lie she'd told me. The furnace crisis? 3 days after I'd paid for the repair, Jennifer had posted a photo of their family at a high-end restaurant in downtown Chicago, celebrating Marcus's early birthday, with a meal that couldn't have cost less than $300. The caption read, "Blessed beyond measure, so grateful we can treat ourselves after a tough month." No mention of freezing children or broken heating systems. The Florida vacation I'd funded by babysitting their dog? Jennifer had posted daily updates. Beach photos, resort amenities, shopping trips. But it was the geotag that caught my attention. They hadn't stayed at a modest beach rental. They'd been at the Ritz-Carlton in Naples, rooms starting at $600 a night. I'd paid for the dog kennel, funded what they'd told me was an affordable family trip, while they'd lived in luxury. Emma's medical bills. I searched Jennifer's blog posts from that week and found a detailed entry about navigating healthcare as a parent. She described the emergency room visit, the stitches, the fear of injury. But there was a line that stopped me cold. Thank God for good insurance. The bill could have been catastrophic, but we only paid a $50 copay. $50. I'd given her $2,500. She'd lied about the insurance lapsing, pocketed my money, and then publicly bragged about how affordable their health care was. I felt something shift inside me then, something fundamental. This wasn't misunderstanding or poor communication. This was calculated fraud, and I had evidence. Over the next week, I barely slept. I hired a private investigator, a woman named Sandra Reeves who specialized in financial investigations. I gave her everything I had, every document and screenshot and bank statement, and asked her to find out what else I didn't know. What she found was worse than I'd imagined. Jennifer had debt, crushing debt that she'd hidden from Marcus. Credit cards maxed out on designer clothes and home decor. A car lease she couldn't afford. The expensive activities she'd enrolled the children in, all charged to cards that were in collection. She'd been using my money to juggle payments, keeping up the Instagram-perfect facade while drowning financially. But the real bombshell was the house. Their beautiful Victorian in Evanston, the one I'd helped maintain with repairs and upgrades. Jennifer had convinced Marcus to refinance it 6 months ago, pulling out $130,000 in equity. Marcus thought the money was going into a college fund for the kids. Jennifer had used it to pay off credit cards and buy herself a nearly new Audi. She's running a con, Sandra said, laying out the evidence in my living room. Not on strangers, on her own family. Classic financial abuse. She isolates the victims, controls access to information, and drains resources while making them feel guilty for questioning her. Your son has no idea how bad his financial situation really is, and you were next on the list. I thought about the estate planning lawyer, about how close I'd come to signing over my assets. If I'd been just a little more trusting, a little more desperate for family connection, I'd have walked into her trap. What do I do? I asked Sandra. You fight back, she said simply. But carefully. If she's a true narcissist, and I think she is, confronting her directly will only escalate. You need leverage, you need proof that's undeniable, and you need to reach Marcus without her interference. That's when I started planning the confrontation that would happen 3 months later in that conference room. But first, I needed to understand exactly how deep Jennifer's manipulation went. I reached out to her sister Melissa, whom I'd met briefly at the wedding. A short conversation on Facebook Messenger led to a phone call, which led to a 3-hour conversation that turned my blood to ice. You too? Melissa said when I explained what was happening. Helen, I'm so sorry. I should have warned you, but I didn't think anyone would believe me. Jennifer's been doing this her whole life. Melissa told me about their childhood, about Jennifer's pattern of manipulation that started young, how she'd convinced their parents that Melissa was the problem child while positioning herself as the perfect daughter. How Jennifer had stolen from Melissa's college fund, framing it as a loan their parents agreed to, even though Melissa had never been told. How she'd isolated Melissa from their parents with careful lies and strategic incidents until Melissa finally gave up and moved to Seattle. She's not going to stop with you, Melissa warned. She needs supply. That's what the therapist called it when I finally got help. Narcissists need supply, attention, and resources and control. Marcus is her primary source, but you were supplementary supply. Now she's cutting you off because you're not useful anymore. She's probably already lining up the next source. Who? I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I knew. Your grandkids, Melissa said quietly. She'll use them next. Against Marcus, against you, against anyone who might threaten her control. Emma's already showing signs. The perfectionism, the anxiety about pleasing Jennifer. I've seen it in photos, the way that little girl's smile never quite reaches her eyes anymore. I thought about Emma at 7, already in therapy, already enrolled in activities that maximize Jennifer's Instagram aesthetic rather than the child's happiness. Jackson at 5, being trained in Mandarin and violin when he should be playing with trucks and getting dirty. My grandchildren were becoming Jennifer's next project, molded into perfect reflections of her curated life, and I'd been exiled so I couldn't interfere. That's when I knew I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for them. Sandra helped me build the case. 3 months of investigation, documentation, interviews with everyone Jennifer had conned or manipulated. We found her former business partner from a failed boutique, left holding $60,000 in debt while Jennifer walked away clean. We found her previous boyfriend, who'd filed a restraining order after she'd stolen his identity to open credit cards. We found a trail of small destructions that Jennifer had left in her wake, each victim isolated and convinced they were the problem. We compiled it all into a dossier that read like a criminal profile. Bank records, social media evidence, witness statements, everything organized and cross-referenced and undeniable. But I needed one more thing. I needed Marcus to see the truth without Jennifer's filter. Sandra had an idea. "Your son's school," she said. "He teaches there, right? High school history?" "Yes, at Lincoln Park Academy." "Does the school have family days, events where parents visit?" They did. An annual fundraiser where the school showcased student projects and teachers met with families. It was coming up in 2 weeks, and Marcus had mentioned it in passing during one of our now sterile phone calls. Jennifer would be there, of course, but it was public enough that she couldn't control every interaction. I volunteered to help with the event, working with the PTA president to coordinate catering. No one questioned a parent volunteer, even if that parent was actually a grandmother on a mission. The day of the event, I arrived early and positioned myself strategically at the refreshment table, where I could watch Marcus's classroom without being obvious. Jennifer arrived like a queen, perfectly dressed in designer casual, immediately inserting herself into conversations and taking photos for her Instagram. Marcus trailed behind her, carrying their contribution to the bake sale, looking exhausted. The children weren't with them, probably at another of their endless scheduled activities. I watched Jennifer work the room, her charm deployed like a weapon. Other parents gravitated to her, drawn by her confidence and polish. She was telling some story that had everyone laughing, and I caught the words mother-in-law and boundaries and saw sympathetic nods. She was rewriting our family narrative in real time, casting herself as the patient daughter-in-law dealing with a difficult older woman. My hands clenched around the coffee pot I was holding, and I had to remind myself to breathe. Confronting her here would accomplish nothing except making me look unhinged, playing right into her narrative. But then I saw something that changed my approach. Another teacher, a young woman named Amy, who I'd met at a previous school event, approached Marcus while Jennifer was distracted. Amy touched his arm gently, concern evident on her face, and Marcus's whole body language shifted. He leaned toward her, said something quiet, and I saw real emotion crack through his careful facade. Sadness, maybe, or exhaustion. Amy hugged him, brief but sincere, and Marcus closed his eyes for just a moment, like he was absorbing kindness he didn't often receive. Jennifer saw it too. I watched her expression transform from social butterfly to cold predator in an instant. She excused herself from her conversation and moved across the room with purpose, her smile never faltering, but her eyes hard. She inserted herself between Marcus and Amy physically, her hand claiming Marcus's waist, her laugh just a bit too loud. "There you are, honey," she said to Marcus. "I was looking for you. We need to go say hello to Principal Davidson. You know how important networking is for your career." She turned to Amy with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You'll excuse us, I'm sure. Professional obligations." Amy stepped back, and I saw her expression close off, that careful neutrality that comes from learning not to engage with someone who makes every interaction a power play. Marcus let himself be led away, and I realized he'd been doing that for years. Letting himself be led, controlled, managed. That's when I made my decision. The confrontation couldn't happen here, in public, where Jennifer controlled the narrative. It needed to be somewhere she couldn't escape, somewhere with witnesses who mattered, somewhere the evidence could speak for itself without her spin. I called Thomas Chen that night. "I need to organize a family meeting. Formal, legal, undeniable. Can you help?" He could. More than that, he'd been waiting for me to ask. Within a week, we'd scheduled a meeting at his law firm's Chicago office, ostensibly to discuss my estate planning. Marcus and Jennifer were invited as my beneficiaries to review the documents and ask questions. Jennifer jumped at the invitation, probably seeing it as the culmination of her long game. She had no idea what was waiting for her. The morning of the meeting, I dressed carefully. Not the comfortable cardigan and slacks that Jennifer had trained me to feel shabby in, but a tailored suit I'd bought for business presentations years ago. I did my makeup, styled my hair, wore the pearls Richard had given me for our 20th anniversary. I looked in the mirror and saw not a discarded mother-in-law, but a professional woman with 4 decades of business experience and nothing left to lose. Thomas met me in the lobby of his firm, a sleek glass building in the Loop that screamed competence and power. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready," I confirmed. We'd invited others too, though Marcus and Jennifer didn't know it yet. Sandra Reeves with her investigative file. A family therapist who specialized in narcissistic abuse. Thomas's partner, Rebecca, who specialized in elder financial abuse cases. And Melissa, Jennifer's sister, who'd flown in from Seattle because she wanted to see her sister finally face consequences. The conference room felt like a tomb. 20 faces stared at me across that mahogany table, and the only sound was my daughter-in-law's sharp intake of breath as I slid the folder across to my son. "Marcus," I said quietly, "I need you to look at this, all of it, without Jennifer interpreting it for you. Can you do that?" He glanced at Jennifer, automatic and conditioned, but she was staring at the folder like it might explode. Her face had gone pale beneath her carefully applied makeup, and I saw her calculating, trying to figure out what I knew, how much damage control she'd need to deploy. "Helen," she started, her voice pitched to concern and confusion. "What is this? I thought we were here to discuss your estate planning. This feels like an ambush." "It is an ambush," I said calmly, "because you've left me no other choice. You've controlled access to my son, isolated me from my grandchildren, and systematically drained my resources while planning to do worse. This ends today." Marcus opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside was everything. The bank statements showing $63,000 in gifts that were extracted through lies. The screenshots from Jennifer's social media proving those lies. The credit reports showing her hidden debt. The documentation of the refinance and missing equity. The witness statements from her sister, her ex-partner, her former boyfriend. 3 months of investigation compiled into undeniable proof. I watched the color drain from his face as he read, flipping through page after page, his expression shifting from confusion to recognition to horror. He looked up at Jennifer, questions forming, and she was already pivoting. "Marcus, honey, I can explain all of this. Your mother has clearly been manipulated by someone. This is all taken out of context. You know how she can be, how she misunderstands things." Jennifer reached for the folder, but Thomas smoothly intervened. "Mrs. Coleman, I'd advise you to be very careful about what you say next. This room contains several witnesses, and anything you say can and will be used in potential legal proceedings. Ms. Reeves, would you like to present your findings?"
Sandra stood, professional and calm, and proceeded to dismantle Jennifer's lies with forensic precision. Every financial transaction traced and explained. Every social media post dated and cross-referenced with Jennifer's requests for money. The timeline of manipulation laid out in clinical detail. Marcus sat frozen, the folder still open in front of him, looking between me and Jennifer like he was seeing both of us for the first time. I could see the cognitive dissonance playing out on his face, years of conditioning fighting against overwhelming evidence. "The Florida vacation," he said finally, his voice barely audible. "You told me your parents paid for that. You said it was their anniversary gift to us." "They did contribute," Jennifer said quickly. "Most of it. Your mother helped with incidentals. She's exaggerating. We stayed at the Ritz-Carlton, Jennifer, for a week. That cost at least $4,000. My mother paid to kennel our dog and thought she was helping us afford a modest beach trip while we were staying in luxury." His voice was getting stronger, anger cutting through confusion. "You lied to both of us." "I was trying to give our family nice experiences. Your mother was happy to help. She offered. After you told her we were struggling." Marcus was standing now, the folder clutched in his hand. "After you made her think we couldn't afford a family vacation any other way. That's not offering, Jennifer. That's manipulation." I watched my son wake up to reality in real time, watched 3 years of fog begin to clear, and I felt something in my chest that might have been hope. But Jennifer wasn't done. "You're going to believe her over me? Your own wife? Marcus, think about what you're doing. Your mother has always been jealous of our relationship. She's never accepted me. This is her trying to break us apart." "Show him the refinance documents," I said quietly. Sandra slid another folder across the table. Marcus opened it and went very, very still. "You told me that money went into a college fund," he said. "It did. Most of it did. I just had some expenses." "There's no college fund, Jennifer." Rebecca, Thomas's partner, spoke up. "We checked. The entire $130,000 was used to pay off your personal credit card debt and purchase a vehicle in your name only. Your children have no college savings except a small $529 account your mother-in-law set up 3 years ago with $10,000 that you don't have access to." I'd forgotten about that, actually. A gift I'd set up when Emma was born, locked so only the children could access it when they turned 18. At the time, it had seemed like a nice gesture. Now it looked like the only financial security my grandchildren had. Marcus sat down heavily, all the air gone from his body. "The house," he said. "We refinanced our house. I signed papers. You said it was for the kids." "It was for the family," Jennifer insisted, but her voice had lost its confident edge. She was looking around the room, perhaps finally realizing that her usual tactics weren't working here, that she couldn't charm or manipulate or gaslight her way out of documented evidence. "Mrs. Coleman," Thomas said formally, "we've also become aware of several instances of financial fraud that may rise to the level of criminal activity. Identity theft, obtaining money under false pretenses, potentially embezzlement if we consider the refinance as your husband's stolen equity. Mr. Coleman, as an attorney, I have to advise you that you may want to consider legal separation to protect yourself financially from your wife's debts and actions." "Separation?" Jennifer's voice rose, real panic breaking through. "Marcus, you can't be seriously considering this. We have children together. We have a life. Your mother shows up with some folder full of lies, and you're going to throw away our marriage?" But Marcus wasn't looking at her anymore. He was looking at me, really looking at me, and I saw tears on his face. "Mom," he said, his voice breaking, "what did I do to you?" And there it was, the moment I'd been waiting for and dreading in equal measure. My son, seeing clearly for the first time in 3 years, understanding what he'd lost, what he'd allowed to be taken. I wanted to comfort him, to rush around the table and hug him like I did when he was 8 with a broken arm. But this fracture couldn't be set with a cast and some painkillers. This required something harder. You chose someone else's reality over mine, I said quietly. You let yourself be convinced that my love was smothering instead of supportive, that my help was manipulation instead of generosity, that boundaries meant exile instead of balance. And I understand why. She's good at what she does. But Marcus, you have to understand something. This isn't about punishing you or breaking up your marriage. This is about protecting myself and protecting your children from someone who sees people as resources to be exploited. Jennifer stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I don't have to listen to this. You're a spiteful old woman who can't stand that your son has his own life. Marcus, we're leaving. But Marcus didn't move. He was still staring at the evidence spread across the table, documents that didn't lie, numbers that told a story his wife couldn't spin. The boxes, he said suddenly. That day Mom came over and found her things packed up. You told me she'd asked us to do that she needed space in our attic and had requested we return her belongings. But that wasn't true, was it? Jennifer's silence was answer enough. You were erasing her from our lives, Marcus continued, his voice gaining strength with each revelation. Systematically. The key, the boundaries, the scheduled visits, packing up her things. You were pushing my mother out of our family while telling me it was healthy and normal. And I let you because I trusted you, because I loved you, because I didn't want to believe my wife was capable of this level of deception. Marcus. Jennifer's voice was desperate now, the mask fully cracking. The kids, he interrupted. All those activities, the therapy, the developmental programs, were those really for them? Or were they about your Instagram image, about having perfect children to display online? I saw Jennifer's eyes harden then, the loving wife persona evaporating completely. What replaced it was cold and calculating, and I recognized the look from my research into narcissistic behavior. She was deciding whether to continue playing victim or shift to attack mode. She chose attack. You're weak, Marcus. You've always been weak. That's why you needed me to manage our life, to make decisions, to handle everything while you played teacher for a middle-class salary that can barely support us. Your mother isn't some innocent victim. She's been holding her money over our heads for years, making us beg for help with basic expenses while she lives alone in $1 million house. Who's the real manipulator here? The room went silent. Even Jennifer seemed to realize she'd gone too far, revealing too much of her actual feelings. Marcus's face had gone pale, then red, emotions I couldn't name cycling through his expression. Get out, he said quietly. What? Get out of this office. Go home. Pack a bag. I don't want to see you when I get there. I need time to think, to process this, and I can't do that with you trying to rewrite reality in real time. He looked at Thomas. Can you help me? With legal separation, protecting my assets, getting custody arrangements for the kids? Absolutely, Thomas said. We can start the process immediately if that's what you want. Jennifer's composure shattered completely. She lunged for the folder, trying to grab the evidence, but Sandra was faster, pulling it out of reach. Jennifer turned on me then, her face contorted with rage. This is your fault, she hissed. You couldn't just fade away gracefully. You had to be difficult, had to dig around in our private business, had to ruin everything. You're a bitter old woman with nothing better to do than destroy other people's happiness. No, I said calmly, meeting her eyes without flinching. I'm a mother protecting her family from a predator. There's a difference. Security escorted Jennifer from the building. We could hear her shouting in the hallway, something about lawyers and defamation and custody battles, but it faded as the elevator doors closed. Marcus sat in the sudden silence, his head in his hands. Melissa approached carefully and placed a hand on his shoulder. I'm Jennifer's sister, she said quietly. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry you're going through this, and I'm sorry I didn't warn you before the wedding. I thought maybe she'd changed, that love might fix what was broken in her. I was wrong. Marcus looked up at her, then at me, then at the evidence still spread across the table. How do I come back from this? How do I fix what I did to my mother, to my kids, to myself? One step at a time, the therapist said, speaking for the first time. Her name was Dr. Patricia Okonkwo, and she specialized in helping people recover from narcissistic abuse. First, you acknowledge the reality of what happened. No minimizing, no excusing, just truth. Then you make amends where possible. Then you do the hard work of understanding how you got here so it doesn't happen again. And my children? His voice broke on that word. Your children have been living in an environment of control and manipulation, Dr. Okonkwo continued. They'll need therapy, patience, and a lot of love to understand that they don't have to be perfect to be valued. But they have you, and they have their grandmother, and that's a start. Marcus looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in 3 years. Can you forgive me? I didn't answer right away. I thought about Richard, about the promise I'd made to keep our brownstone, to protect what we'd built. I thought about Emma and Jackson, 7 and 5, who needed better than what they'd been shown. I thought about the 3 months I'd spent building this case, not out of revenge, but out of desperate love. I don't know, I said honestly, but I'm willing to try. Are you? He nodded, tears streaming down his face. I'll do whatever it takes. Therapy, legal separation, custody arrangements that prioritize the kid's well-being over convenience? Whatever you think I should do. What I think, I said carefully, is that you need to make your own decisions now. Real ones, based on reality instead of manipulation. I can support you, guide you if you want, but I can't fix this for you. You have to do that yourself. And he did. Over the next 6 months, Marcus filed for separation, moved into an apartment with the kids 3 days a week, and started intensive therapy with Dr. Okonkwo. Those first weeks were brutal. He called me almost every night, sometimes just to sit in silence on the phone while he processed what he was learning about himself, about the relationship he'd been in, about the warning signs he'd missed or ignored. She told me you were controlling, he said one night, his voice hollow. She said you were trying to keep me dependent, that the money you gave us came with strings attached. And I believed her because she was so convincing, Mom. She'd cry and tell me about her own childhood, about her mother who was overbearing and manipulative, and somehow every story made you sound like that mother. I see it now. She was projecting. Everything she accused you of, she was doing herself. I listened to these confessions. Each one a small knife to the heart, but necessary. Like cleaning out an infected wound. It had to hurt before it could heal. Jennifer fought viciously, hired an expensive lawyer named Richard Thornton, who specialized in high-conflict divorces and had a reputation for destroying opposing parties. He was expensive, probably $40,000 in retainer fees, and I wondered where Jennifer got the money until Sandra discovered she'd maxed out yet another credit card in Marcus's name. That became Exhibit 23 in the custody proceedings. Thornton tried every tactic. He painted Marcus as an unfit father who'd abandoned his family for his domineering mother. He tried to introduce evidence that I was mentally unstable, that I'd manufactured the financial abuse claims out of jealousy and age-related paranoia. He scheduled depositions designed to humiliate and exhaust, asked invasive questions about my marriage to Richard, about my parenting of Marcus, about my finances and health and social life. But Thomas and Rebecca were better. They stayed calm, presented evidence systematically, and let Jennifer's own actions speak for themselves. The social media posts that contradicted her claims of poverty, the credit reports showing fraud in Marcus's name, the testimonies from Melissa, from Jennifer's former business partner, from 3 different brands she'd defrauded with fake sponsorship metrics. The turning point came during Jennifer's court-ordered psychological evaluation. Dr. Sarah Brennan, a forensic psychologist with 30 years of experience, spent 6 hours with Jennifer across 3 sessions. Her report was devastating. Narcissistic personality disorder with antisocial features, inability to empathize, pattern of exploitative relationships, high risk for continued manipulation and emotional abuse of children. Brennan's recommendation was supervised visitation only, with therapy required before any expansion of custody. The judge agreed. I attended some of the custody hearings, sitting in the back of the courtroom, watching my son fight for his children. Jennifer performed beautifully on the stand, tears and trembling voice, talking about how much she loved her babies, how she was being persecuted by her vindictive mother-in-law and manipulated husband. If I hadn't known the truth, I might have believed her myself. But Marcus stayed steady. He presented evidence calmly. He admitted his own failures, his blindness, his complicity in isolating me from the grandchildren. He talked about Emma's anxiety and Jackson's regression, about finding Jennifer's browser history, showing she'd been researching how to prove grandparents unfit for visitation, about the day he'd found her coaching Emma to say that Grandma Helen was mean and scary. The judge, a woman in her 60s named Patricia Morales, saw through it all. When she delivered her custody ruling, she looked directly at Jennifer and said something I'll never forget. "Mrs. Coleman, this court recognizes that you love your children in your own way. But love without respect for their autonomy, love that requires them to be perfect extensions of your image rather than their own people, that's not the kind of love that serves children's best interests. Your children need space to be imperfect, to fail, to grow. Until you can provide that, your time with them will be limited and supervised." The divorce took 18 months total. Marcus got primary custody, with Jennifer having supervised visitation after a psychological evaluation revealed concerning patterns of emotional manipulation with the children. She lost her lifestyle blog sponsorships after I quietly shared evidence of her fraud with several brands she'd been representing. Her Instagram following plummeted when her perfect life facade crumbled publicly. I didn't take pleasure in Jennifer's downfall, but I didn't mourn it either. She'd made her choices, built her life on manipulation and exploitation, and now she was facing natural consequences. Some people called me vindictive for contacting her sponsors. I called it protecting future victims. If she couldn't profit from fraud, maybe she'd think twice before trying it again. Or maybe she wouldn't. Narcissists rarely change, Dr. Okonkwo told me. They don't see themselves as the problem. To this day, I imagine Jennifer tells people she's the victim in this story, that her evil mother-in-law destroyed her marriage and stole her children. Maybe she even believes it. That's not my concern anymore. I wish I could say I felt victorious, but mostly I felt tired and sad. Sad for the years we'd lost, sad for my grandchildren's confusion, sad even for Jennifer, who'd been so broken inside that she could only relate to people as things to use. Emma and Jackson adjusted slowly. Emma had nightmares for months, kept apologizing for minor mistakes, terrified of making anyone angry. The first time she spilled milk at my kitchen table, she froze completely, her little body going rigid with fear, tears already forming before a single drop hit the floor. "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry," she whispered, and the terror in her voice told me everything about what life had been like with Jennifer. "It's just milk, sweetheart," I said gently, grabbing a towel. "Accidents happen. Nobody's angry. You're safe here." She watched me clean it up, confused that there were no consequences, no lecture about being more careful, no Instagram post about teaching children responsibility through natural consequences. When I asked if she wanted more milk in a new glass, she burst into tears. It took 20 minutes of rocking her to calm down, and later Marcus told me Jennifer used to make Emma clean up her own spills with specific cleaning products, timing her to ensure she was learning efficiency. Emma was 7 years old. She should have been worrying about playground politics and whether she'd get the good swing at recess, not efficiency metrics for cleaning spills. Jackson's regression was different, but equally heartbreaking. At 5, he'd been fully potty trained for 2 years, but the stress of his parents' separation brought back accidents. Jennifer used these accidents as evidence that Marcus couldn't properly care for the children, actually documented each one in a spreadsheet she tried to submit to the court. When Marcus found the spreadsheet, he told me he'd cried for an hour, realizing his wife had been tracking their son's trauma like data points instead of comforting a scared child. Jackson became clingy in ways that broke my heart, but also gradually healed it. He'd follow me room to room in the brownstone, always needing to see where I was, panicking if I went upstairs without telling him. "Gamma's just going to get a sweater," I'd say. "I'll be right back. You can count to 20 and I'll be back before you're done." I'd count with him from upstairs, loud enough for him to hear, and when I came back down, he'd throw himself at my legs with relief. We did this dozens of times a day for weeks until he slowly, gradually began to trust that people who left could also return, that absence wasn't abandonment. Dr. Okonkwo explained that children of narcissistic parents often develop anxious attachment because love in their household was conditional and unpredictable. They never knew which parent they'd get, the charming one or the cold one, so they became hypervigilant, always scanning for danger, always trying to be perfect enough to avoid triggering a shift. "Your job," she told me and Marcus, "is to be boring, predictably kind, consistently present. No drama, no big gestures, just steady love. That's what will rewire their nervous systems." So we were boring. Marcus kept the same schedule every week. Wednesday nights were pizza and board games. Saturday mornings were pancakes and cartoons. Sunday afternoons were grandma time at the brownstone. We did this week after week, month after month, until the children stopped asking if we were sure we wanted them around, stopped apologizing for existing, stopped performing perfection. The first time Emma got mad at me, actually angry, yelling that she hated carrots and didn't want them for dinner, I wanted to cry with joy. Healthy children feel safe enough to express anger. Marcus handled it perfectly, calmly saying she didn't have to eat the carrots, but that was what was being served with dinner, and if she was hungry later, there would be fruit. No punishment, no guilt trip, just a boundary with kindness. Emma tested that boundary for weeks, refusing various foods, waiting to see if we'd snap, if the other shoe would drop. It never did. Eventually, she ate the carrots without comment, and we all pretended it wasn't a massive milestone. But with therapy and patience and stable love, they began to heal. Emma's nightmares decreased from nightly to weekly to occasional. Jackson started playing independently, no longer needing to track my location every moment. They laughed more, the real belly laughs of childhood instead of the performed giggles that looked good on camera. Marcus and I rebuilt our relationship carefully, with healthy boundaries that we both agreed on. This wasn't the easy reconciliation you see in movies, where apologies are made and everything goes back to normal with swelling music and happy tears. This was slow, awkward, painful work. The first few months, Marcus couldn't look me in the eye. He'd show up for our scheduled coffee dates, bring the kids over for their visits, but there was this chasm between us that all the apologies in the world couldn't immediately bridge. I damaged the trust by documenting his life, hiring an investigator, ambushing him in that conference room. He damaged it by choosing Jennifer's reality over mine, by packing up my belongings and treating me like an intrusion instead of his mother. We both had to sit with that discomfort instead of rushing to make it better. Dr. Okonkwo facilitated some of our early conversations, helping us communicate without falling into old patterns. Marcus learned to use I statements instead of deflecting blame. I learned to express hurt without catastrophizing or manipulating with guilt. We both learned that forgiveness isn't a light switch you flip, but a muscle you strengthen through repeated use. He didn't move back to the brownstone, even though his apartment was small and expensive, and I had 3 empty bedrooms. We both knew that would be regression, fixing problems with the same solution that had enabled them. Marcus needed to prove to himself that he could stand on his own, that he didn't need to be rescued, that independence wasn't abandonment. He didn't ask for money, even when things were tight, even when the divorce lawyer bills piled up and his budget was stretched to breaking. There were times I wanted to offer, old habits of solving his problems with my checkbook dying hard, but Thomas advised against it. Let him struggle, Thomas said. Let him learn that struggle doesn't mean failure. If he asks for help, that's different, but don't rob him of the dignity of solving his own problems. So I watched my son eat ramen and shop at Goodwill and stress about bills, and I kept my wallet closed. It was one of the hardest things I'd ever done, harder in some ways than the confrontation with Jennifer, because every maternal instinct screamed to make his life easier. But easy wasn't what Marcus needed. He needed to know he was capable. He didn't try to erase what had happened with premature forgiveness, didn't show up one day with flowers and a card saying, "Let's put this behind us." He did the work. Individual therapy twice a week, then weekly, then bi-weekly as he progressed. Group therapy for abuse survivors, where he heard stories from others who'd been manipulated by narcissistic partners and realized he wasn't uniquely weak or stupid. He took parenting classes to unlearn the patterns Jennifer had established, learned about authoritative versus authoritarian parenting, about building emotional intelligence in children, about repairing ruptures in the parent-child relationship. He read books with titles like Will I Ever Be Good Enough? And Stop Walking on Eggshells, and The Body Keeps the Score. I'd see them on his coffee table during visits, dog-eared and highlighted, evidence of his commitment to understanding. He showed up consistently. Every Wednesday for pizza, every Saturday for pancakes, every Sunday at the brownstone. Even when he was exhausted, even when work was overwhelming, even when the kids were cranky and would have been easier to reschedule. He showed up because that's what trust is built on, not grand gestures, but small, reliable presence. He admitted his mistakes specifically, not with vague apologies, but with detailed acknowledgement. "I'm sorry I let Jennifer pack up your things without asking you first. I'm sorry I didn't question her version of events. I'm sorry I made you feel like you needed permission to be a grandmother. I'm sorry I didn't see the financial manipulation until you forced me to look at it. I'm sorry I chose comfort over truth." Each apology was a small brick in the bridge we were rebuilding between us. And never once did he try to minimize what he'd done. Never said, "But I was manipulated," as if that erased his choices. He owned all of it, the complicity, the willful blindness, the moments he knew something was wrong, but took the easier path of believing Jennifer's explanations. "I could have looked at the bank statements," he told me 6 months into therapy. "I could have questioned why we needed a refinance when we weren't planning any major expenses. I could have wondered why you were always the solution to our financial emergencies. But I didn't, because looking meant having to face things I didn't want to face. That's on me, not just on Jennifer." That acknowledgement meant more than any apology. 2 years after that conference room confrontation, we had our first real Christmas together since Jennifer entered our lives. In my brownstone, with the tree in its traditional corner, with Emma and Jackson making chaos in the kitchen while we prepared blueberry pancakes. Marcus had brought his girlfriend, Amy, the teacher from his school, who'd shown him kindness when he needed it most. She was gentle and genuine. And when Emma spilled juice all over the hardwood floors I'd spent years maintaining, Amy just laughed and helped clean it up without making the child feel ashamed. We took photos that day. Real photos, not carefully curated Instagram images, but messy, joyful evidence of life being lived. Emma with chocolate on her face, Jackson with his shirt inside out, Marcus smiling in a way that reached his eyes again, Amy fitting naturally into our family's chaos. I posted one photo to my Facebook, my only social media presence. Just one picture of my grandchildren by the Christmas tree, their expressions open and happy and real. The caption said, "Family is who shows up. Merry Christmas." Jennifer saw it, I'm sure. She was blocked from contacting us directly, but the internet is forever and boundaries are porous. I hope she felt something when she saw what she'd lost. Not the Instagram perfect family she'd tried to curate, but the genuine mess of people who loved each other, flaws and all. But mostly, I didn't think about Jennifer anymore. I'd taken back my life, my son had found his spine, and my grandchildren were learning that love didn't come with conditions, and perfection wasn't a requirement for belonging. The brownstone stands solid in Lincoln Park, worth even more now than when this all started. My estate planning is secure, locked down by Thomas and Rebecca, with provisions that protect not just my assets, but my grandchildren's future. Marcus will inherit when I die, but not before, and only with stipulations that ensure the money supports the kids' well-being, not anyone else's lifestyle. I still work with small businesses on their finances, still live alone in the home Richard and I built, still water the garden we planted together. But I'm not lonely anymore. Emma and Jackson come over twice a week, bring their homework and their drama and their boundless energy. Marcus calls every Sunday, not because a calendar invite tells him to, but because he wants to hear my voice. And sometimes, late at night when the city sounds settle into their evening rhythm, I sit in Richard's favorite chair and feel the weight of what we built together. Not just the brownstone, but the legacy of standing firm when pressure comes, of protecting what matters, of loving hard enough to fight for it. I kept my promise to Richard. Our house remains mine, our values remain intact, and our son learned, painfully but thoroughly, that some foundations are worth protecting. That's not revenge. That's just knowing your worth and refusing to negotiate it away, not even for love.